Hi, everybody. It's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Great to have you with me today as I move through those summer vacations. It's always great to be back on my rock solid Plant-Based Business Hour, my touchstone. I can always count on it to bring me back to the groove. We have a lot to talk about. Of late, we've gone through things go in waves, as we know. We've gone through this wave of negative media based basically on what the meat industry thinks of our industry, which would not be an unbiased opinion. So we had this negative wave that seems to have passed, and then it moved from being a negative wave about plant-based to being a negative wave about cultivated meat. So cultivated meat has been made into the hero that is going to save the planet, or it's also been made into the villain. Can it really scale? Will it ever meet cost parity? And what kind of environmental footprint does it really have? What kind of energy use does it have? So today we do the deep dive and we get into all the questions, because as the technology advances and as Upside Foods and Good Meat get approval from the US government to sell their products, their cultivated meat chicken, their cultivated chicken in the marketplace, we are closer than ever to cultivated meat. Will it work? Will it scale? Will it succeed? I want to bring on today's guest, who is the Chief Strategy Officer. Oops, there you go. Chief Strategy Officer of OMeat, which is the only cultivated meat company that I know that is working on beef grounds. Pavle Stojkovic, thanks for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So let's get into it, folks. Big fat deep dive. It's about 2.8 billion that has been invested into this sector being specifically cultivated meat. Over 100 companies worldwide are working on beef or chicken or seafood, lots of cultivated seafood out there. Why did OMeat decide to tackle ground beef specifically?
Well, I think ground beef is a major product that people are using, not just in the United States but all over the world, right? It's extremely versatile, and you can use it for all kinds of things, from burgers to tacos to you name it, right? So certainly, in terms of the food that people are eating, it made sense for us to start with ground beef. But also, if you're looking at the environmental footprint and the ethical footprint of beef and just what cows, from the ethical perspective for cows themselves, but also the environmental footprint for cows, right? It's a no-brainer for us that that's a logical place to start. We believe that we can have the biggest impact, the fastest, if we focus on beef, if we focus on cows first.
Yeah, there's a wonderful statistic that I love, really puts into place the scale of our global food supply system, which is based on meat. So we're really talking about the scale of meat. Not just is it a $1.4 trillion industry, but 41% of the world's global tropical deforestation is because of grazing cattle. We're really talking about, leveling the Amazon for cattle raising, which makes no sense. Another statistic that, of course, is cows being the most inefficient of business equations, requiring 25 to 35 calories of crop to get 1 calorie of cow. This is why we deforest so much. You have to keep cutting down trees to keep growing crops that have protein and fiber. We could give that food to people. We don't. We give it to animals. So just the worst business equation out there. So beef makes a whole lot of sense to me. But when I think of grounds, I think of, there's an opportunity here for a hybrid product because it's not structured. So perhaps there's a lower hanging bar there, lower hanging piece of fruit to reach the integrity of the product because it's ground, so it's a little bit easier than a whole cut. But it also has the opportunity to maybe even lower the bar further and just be a hybrid, let's say with cultivated fat into TVP and texturized vegetable protein. I'm just picking something off the top of my head. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think, so our product is focused on ground beef, right? So we're not focused on a hybrid protein, but generally speaking, yes. I mean, anything that moves the needle, we should be doing anything and everything, right? So if hybrid products are going to move the needle, if that means less animals are going to be slaughtered, if that means lowering the impact on the climate, then we as an industry, we as entrepreneurs should be pursuing all of those things. So I think, also if we're just thinking about comparing apples to apples, the food puns just write themselves, and they're never ending. But products already on the market that we kind of consider to be meat products, like chicken nuggets at McDonald's, right? Those are already hybrid products. It's not like those are just
Ridiculous.
100% chicken. They're cutting them with soy anyway, right? So those are things that we as an industry should, of course, be pursuing, because that's what the meat industry is doing today. And then if that means bringing down costs of these products sooner, we should be pursuing those options.
Mm-hmm. And I think people often, or let's say the media, often focuses on, oh, will there be this one silver bullet that would somehow wipe out the entire food system, or change the entire food system, or change the entire meat system? Again, $1.4 trillion. Obviously, consumers want, just walk down the chip aisle. Consumers want choice. They want triangular chips and square chips and fried chips and baked chips and salted chips and not salted chips and gluten-free chips and wheat chips and pistachio chips, and the list goes on. They want chips stacked in a can, chips loose in a bag, chips ground from corn. So why wouldn't meat be the same? We would have hybrid products. We would have cultivated grounds. We would have cultivated fish, cultivated meat. We would have plant-based meat. We would have fermented proteins. I mean, really, truly, the list does go on, and it can only be better. I say this from a nutritional standpoint. People are always confusing what they read in the media, that maybe plant-based products aren't healthy. Well, compared to what? In the financial industry where I work with VegTech Invest, we never talk about anything unless we have a benchmark. Well, the benchmark is hamburger meat, and that's an awful nutritional profile. Antibiotics, hormones, inducing TMAO, trimethylene oxide, having cholesterol, having animal heme, and having no fiber. Now here, when we move towards the scale of cultivated meat, you're still having meat. So you're still probably going to have trimethylene oxide and some cholesterol, although with technology, who knows where we'll go here, but at least you don't have antibiotics and hormones. Am I thinking about this correctly?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, one thing that you mentioned at the top, right? We've got over 100 cultivated meat companies today. This is still a baby industry, right? So right now, what we need to be doing as an industry and as entrepreneurs in this space is, creating as many different options as we can. And I think over time, we'll see what the market actually likes, what consumers actually want. Maybe we'll pivot, maybe we'll consolidate overall as an industry. That's the point of innovation. That's the point of going through this technological discovery, is to figure out what's possible and what consumers want at the end of the day. So it's a good thing that we have hundreds of companies in the space. It's a good thing that we're trying anything and everything. That's the whole point of innovation at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the innovation, the nuts and bolts of it. Are you using, maybe just map out for people what you and I know what cultivated meat is, but what exactly is cultivated meat? And specifically with OMeat ground beef, what are you doing?
Yeah, so I think, the simplest way I can put it for somebody that has zero understanding of what cultivated meat is, right? We take cells from an animal. In our case, we take, cells from a cow, and we, put those cells in a media. In our case, it's a proprietary media that we use. That's different than, FBS, and I'm sure we'll get to that in just a moment. And we can have those cells grow, right? We put them in an environment that allows for those cells to grow and to flourish, and we use those cells to create meat. In our case, it's bovine muscle, it's animal protein. And that's the short version. That's essentially what cultivated meat is today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so really I want to dive in there. Usually, although it's everyone's intention to get rid of this, cells are taken from a cow that's pregnant, if I understand this correctly, and it's the fetal bovine serum.
Yeah.
Even that baby, that not
So
not the
so the
fetus. Go
cells.
ahead.
Sorry to jump in here. The cells
No,
can come
please.
in a few different ways, right? You can biopsy a living animal. You can get cells from a slaughtered animal as well. But the fundamental thing here is the fetal bovine serum, FBS, right? That is, an inherently cruel process. Fetal bovine serum comes from the blood of a fetal cow. It's kind of positioned as a byproduct of the slaughter industry, of the animal ag industry. But fundamentally, I mean, if there's a market for it, it just means that it's subsidizing that industry further, right? Because there's money to be made there. So, it's inherently cruel because it's part of the slaughter process, and it requires the death of not just the mother animal, but the fetus itself. And it's extremely inefficient. I mean, you can go on Thermo Fisher's website and see exactly, how much of it you can get from a cow, from a fetus, and it's small. It's like 500 milliliters per fetus. It's not very much, and they're only selling about 300,000 liters of it, give or take. I double check the exact numbers per year. So it's not very much, and it's inherently cruel. It's difficult to scale around FBS.
Right. So that was really my understanding, that the fetal bovine serum and the practices just being awful, but also very hard to scale if you're ever going to use that as your medium, because there's just not enough made, and it's so incredibly inefficient that it makes it really inexpensive. Now, I think you're not using fetal bovine serum. So walk me through exactly what you guys are using and doing and what it replaces.
Yeah. So I think, look, like, just to kind of close the chapter on FBS, right? When you're talking about academia and research, it makes sense, right? Having access to something like FBS allows a lot of our modern medicine to exist, right? But when you start thinking about it in terms of cultivated meat and going from something like academia and research, where it's used in small quantities, and starting to scale it up into food production so that we can
commodity.
Exactly, right? It's a whole totally different ballgame. You need something different. And at OMeat, what our scientists and what our founding team discovered is that essentially you can take the plasma from an adult cow, and we make a product that's a bovine platelet lysate. We call it Plenty. That's our branded name for it. It's slaughter free, so it doesn't require the slaughter of the animal. We draw that plasma similar to how a human being donates plasma. We use an apheresis machine. We spin the plasma out. The blood goes back into the cow. The cow walks away, right? And then we have a proprietary process that we process that plasma into Plenty. We take things out of it. We don't add things to it, which is, I think, for those that are scientifically minded, that's something that's very important to mention, and an important distinction to make. And what we've seen is that Plenty performs honestly better than FBS. It's a 1-to-1 replacement, which means that however much FBS you're using, you use the same amount of Plenty, and it outperforms FBS. Our cells grow better, more of them, and they grow faster. And that's really what allows us to create much more, cultivated beef, cultivated animal protein, and do it much more cost effectively.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of questions there. You're replacing FBS. Are you also replacing scaffolding? For those who might not know, scaffolding just might be thought of like any architectural product, a building. You build the scaffold and then you build the building around it, given that scaffolding structure. Does it replace the scaffolding as well?
So in our case, yes. We also use Plenty to create our own animal protein microcarriers, which is something that's really exciting, and that's really what allows us to be able to say, hey, we're making 100% animal protein here. So we're not using any plant-based scaffolding or anything like that in our product either.
Mm-hmm. And plasma. I haven't really heard of others using plasma. Why is that? It sort of seems like a no-brainer, because the inefficiency and cost of fetal bovine serum, you think, would have pushed innovation towards thinking outside that box. Why have I not seen it before?
It's a good question, and it's a question that I actually was asking myself when I first met the team here at OMeat. I think at the end of the day, because FBS is something that's been around for decades, and it's been used in academia and research. And honestly, there's very little incentive to move away from something that works when it's in academia and when it's in research. If you're getting funding from others or from the government, there's not as much of an incentive to innovate on FBS, because people know that it works, right? Mm-hmm. So now that we actually have a reason to be thinking about how do we drive the cost down, how do we, find something that's not inherently cruel, maybe we can replace it with something that's slaughter free, we have more of an incentive to look for alternatives. And I think that's why you see a lot of companies that are, aggressively pursuing things that aren't FBS. And in our case, that's Plenty.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that in order to get the plasma and turn it into Plenty, you keep a herd of cows. Is this right?
We do, yeah. So we manage a small farm. We have about 60 cows. Our farm is here in California. Um, we have we have consultants that have a background in regenerative farming and things like that. So not only are we maintaining a farm, but we're maintaining a farm that's incorporating regenerative practices. That means that we're not tilling the land, that we're doing rotational grazing and things like that. Our cows were rescued from slaughter. So these were cows that would have been slaughtered. They are now living out their lives on our farm. We treat our farm like an animal sanctuary, right? That's the whole point. We wanted to show that you can use adult cows and we have a team of vets and vet techs on staff that work with our cows every single day to be able to show that you can have happy, healthy cows. Essentially have your cows and have meat at the same time, and that's the whole point, while we're incorporating these regenerative practices and protecting our land. And I mean, Elizabeth, you kind of have to see it, right? We're next to a dairy that there's like a harsh line where there's like, it's just like dirt and mud and thousands of cows, and then you have this green field that our cows get to live on and get to be outside and enjoy their time. Once a week they come in, we draw the blood, we draw the plasma, and then they go right back out onto the field.
If I go to your website, would I see these pictures?
So we do have some pictures of our cows. I don't know exactly what's on our website today, but we do have a cow cam that we show folks when they come to our lab and things like that. It's a live stream of the cows. When they're in front of the camera, it's great, but it's a big field, so sometimes they're not always on camera. But it does show our farm. Yeah.
Here's just looking at the website. Let me open this up a little bit, just kind of showing you the process, at least, of how they collect the plasma, and then it cultivates, and then they grow, and it forms, and then ultimately they harvest and we'll say package. But it does talk, and you can go to OMeat.com, and it does talk about the farm and how they have cows there, and the standards, basically, as you're saying, Pavle, that they're treated pretty much like a sanctuary, which is obviously great to hear. So one thing I'd like to say is you use the term regenerative agriculture, and people often say, well, regenerative agriculture is the reason that we should keep eating meat. And I want to just to kind of illustrate the subtle difference here of what we're talking about. So when I hear you say that you have a farm and there's regenerative agriculture and you're using cover crops, regenerative agriculture is inherently plant-based. You can have cover crops and legumes and not monocrop, and just grow mushrooms as well as quinoa and chickpea and other things, and have this diverse crop that's rotates, et cetera. So it doesn't have to be with cows, but if it was with cows churning up the ground with their hooves, here's a situation where I can see where animals are still part of the land. I mean, there's always been this triangle of people, animals, and the earth. You get that from Jane Goodall. But here's a equation where you don't have to have 80 billion animals in animal factories. You can have much fewer animals living healthier lives, and keeping the soil healthy and extracting very little from them that works for us. Am I being too idealistic?
Well, I think I don't think so, right? So let me kind of throw some thoughts your way here. So right now at OMeat, right, for it's about a 1-to-20 ratio, right? So for every one cow, we can create 20 cows worth of meat, right?
Wow.
So inherently, you can kind of do the math, and you can see how you can reduce the cow population at scale by 95%, right?
Yes.
To your point, right, we are still keeping animals in the equation, but I also think that fundamentally, I've been vegan myself for almost 9 years. Like, do I wish I could snap my fingers and make the world go vegan overnight? Yes, of course. But that's not how the world works. And quite frankly, you can't have a food system that just changes overnight. This is one of those industries where we have to disrupt it, but we have to disrupt it in a way that doesn't break it. Because if it breaks it, then people don't have food to eat, right? Even if the food that they're eating is animal based and animal derived, right? So we have to understand, how do we walk this path? How do we get from where we are today to where we want to go. And that means that you have to meet people where they are, and you have to think about how to incorporate a lot of these different industries that maybe traditionally haven't been complementary to each other, but our technology allows them to be. We can cultivate meat, and we can work with regenerative ranchers and farmers, all over the world, that have regenerative practices that treat their cows much better than you would find on like a factory farm or a CAFO, things like that, right? So, because it's complementary to farming and to ranching, I think this allows us to have a much more productive conversation when we're talking, with politicians, when we're having regulatory conversations and things like that. So I really think of OMeat as the type of company and the type of technology that we have that really is the connective tissue that brings all these various pieces together in a complementary way rather than an adversarial way.
And of course, we talk about this all the time on this show. Changing the food system, we have to continue to drive the car while we're turning it.
Exactly.
So we don't have the luxury of just stopping and doing a hard right turn. We're going to have to make this gentle curve as we go in a new path. So as you say, we have to keep feeding people while we're changing the global food supply system. So it makes sense that we do this in steps, and technology sort of leads the way, if you will. Ultimately, we're tasked with feeding more people more nutritiously in a shorter amount of time, using fewer resources while creating less damage. That's the mathematical equation we have to solve for, and we have to do it fast. So I of course, embrace this approach wholeheartedly. But I'm a futurist, if you will, and many people feel very protective about their food. And culturally speaking, I'm grossly over paraphrasing and making it too simple, but don't touch my burger. So what can you say about the safety of OMeat, or cultivated ground beef versus regular ground beef? And I'll add, before you say that, according to the United Nations, the top 3 reasons for the next pandemic are all related to eating meat, with the top 2 being related to animal factories, caused by animal factories. So if you think your meat is safe, please go to the August 2022 Consumer Reports to see that the USDA allows for 25% of all chicken to have salmonella. And actually, the numbers are closer to 31% of all chicken that is sold has salmonella. So before you're so protective of that meat that you think is so safe, think about it a little bit more. But Pavle, what can you say about the safety of cultivated meat?
Well, so I'll jump into the safety of cultivated meat in a second, but I think that there's we have to be able to compare cultivated meat with its equivalent in the traditional, animal industry, right? So, you mentioned some statistics just now. One thing that I'm still not hearing a lot of people talking about is BLV, bovine leukemia virus, right? This is something that the USDA says is safe for us to have in our food, and we can be eating it. But now there's tons of studies that are showing that BLV is one of the main causes of breast cancer and things like that. And so we maintain a BLV free herd. And I think at the end of the day, we can create cultivated meat in an environment that's clean, in an environment that's safe. We have a high level of control of exactly what's going into it, up to and including the plasma that we're using from our cows, because we know what we're feeding them. We know what type of environment that they're in. We know that they're in an environment that's more, in line with what their natural states should be, being around other cows, having, room to roam, eating something that's in line with what their natural diets are. And that translates over to the bioprocessing as well, right? We're not using antibiotics. We have, we're the products that we're using, the ingredients that we're using are all food safe ingredients and things like that, right? So these are things that we have a high level of control over. Comparing that to in an environment where animals are stuffed together in CAFOs, where they're being, where they're using antibiotics as prophylactics to make sure that they're not getting sick. All of these things are found in our meat today, and most people have no understanding of that, and they're not getting educated on it because the meat industry doesn't want us to know about it, right? So we have to be willing to kind of compare these two things side by side. And I think when you look at all the data, cultivated meat is a much better product. It's a much safer product for people to be eating.
And if you have any doubt about this, then just look to the pharmaceutical industry, which decided long ago that factory farming pigs to make insulin was not going to be a safe and reliable stream of insulin, because it would be tainted with feces and other things, because the animals are in animal factories where they live in their own feces and they're living butt to snout, sick as can be, hence the antibiotics. So the pharmaceutical industry did away with this a long time ago, and they now use precision fermentation to cultivate, for lack of a better word, what they need from pigs for diabetes medicine, and that is in a controlled environment called a lab. So, if we're really interested in our safety, we would follow suit, following the pharmaceutical industry. Let me pick up on, I think I started this interview by saying there's been a lot of criticism of cultivated meat. Joe Fossler's been out there, out in front, saying, this, and I'm quoting here, the cell culture process will be plagued by extreme, intractable technical challenges at food scale. And I wonder if you could talk about that. Will this ever scale? You talked about bringing price down with plasma, but still, can it really scale?
I mean, absolutely, right? If I didn't think that cultivated meat could scale, I wouldn't be doing this, right? Yeah. I think, look, there's a lot of valid criticisms of any budding industry, but I think saying that it can never scale is, I mean, history is riddled with people that said technologies wouldn't grow, wouldn't scale, things like that, right? I mean, there's a laundry list of forgotten people that said the internet would never happen, right, and that it was just a fad. So, look. Criticism of a budding industry, that's common. I'm used to that. But I think, these are also individuals that aren't actually doing the work day to day, that aren't part of the science. The science can and will scale. I think just, the fact that we have hundreds of companies doing this work, to me, there's a lot of cutting edge science that's happening, not just at OMeat, but at a lot of these other cultivated meat companies, where in my opinion, and what I'm seeing, scaling is inevitable, right? We have the technology to drive the cost down. One of the big ones is replacing FBS. I think that's something that we have already shown here at OMeat by using Plenty, right? And that's one of the main factors. Again, let's compare apples to apples, right? Let's look at the meat industry and let's look at cultivated meat. The reason why we have industrial animal agriculture and CAFOs, and in China now they've got these vertical pig farms, is because they've hit a ceiling with scaling animal agriculture. You can't scale a cow. You can't scale a pig. You need more of them in more confined spaces. The economics of factory farming at scale does not work. That's why it's a heavily subsidized industry. If you took away the subsidies that the federal government is giving animal agriculture, it's a dead industry. So it's a zombie industry that's being propped up by federal funding, by taxpayer dollars, by money printing, right? So to talk about scaling and comparing it to an industry that only gets to exist because it's being heavily subsidized, think about where we are with cultivated meat. We're talking about reaching price parity, but we're comparing that price parity to a subsidized burger, a subsidized chicken, right? Things like that. So it's inevitable, right? The technology is there. It works. We're already in the process of scaling it. And as it continues to grow, it's just going to get cheaper and cheaper.
Mm-hmm. And to the critics, I say, to be so protective of an industry that does not work for you anymore, it's not realistic to assume that we could keep the status quo even if we wanted to. I mean, the status quo does us so many disservices, and we've talked a little bit about environment and the health implications and the pandemic risks, but it's even more so than that. The workers in the factories that have these risky jobs, and then the communities surrounded by these animal factories have polluted water, they have higher risks of cancer, they have domestic violence, they have alcohol abuse. I mean, it's awful for the people who work there and the communities who even don't work there but are surrounded around these environmental nightmares. So even if you wanted to keep this system, you're not keeping it, folks. So I think there's this understanding out there that outsiders are coming in and changing the way people do things. That's actually not right. Governments and even legacy meat companies are enacting change. So it's not a push from the outside, it's a pull from within, because the system we have does not work. So if we can scale, when are we really looking at seeing OMeat on the shelves and the glorified price parity?
It's a great question. So I think, obviously one of the things that we need to do, like every other cultivated meat company, is go through the FDA
Of
and
course.
USDA process, right? And I think, just to kind of go back to safety for just a second, right? Working with the FDA, working with the USDA, it's honestly been a very pleasant experience for us. It's clear to me that these regulatory bodies, have a growing understanding of the work that we're doing, and that they're eager to make sure that cultivated meat is available for consumers as quickly as possible, right? So they're doing the work, and they're making sure that companies like OMeat and other companies in the space are being very thoughtful and very diligent and hyper detailed in what it means to actually bring these products to consumers in a way that's safe for human consumption. So, we're doing the work just like everybody else is. And I think that's, kind of the main thing for us. Once we clear that, we're excited and ready to bring OMeat to the masses.
Yeah, that is very exciting. Well, maybe you can talk a little bit about the energy use, just because I really want to make sure I understand this. I mean, certainly when you reduce the number of cows on the planet, you get enormous methane benefits, right? So 32% of the world's global methane emissions, I get the statistics from the United Nations of Environment, the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program. 32% of the world's global methane emissions come from animal factories, primarily cows. So we're going to get that benefit. But what kind of energy use is needed to run the bioreactors that would grow the cultivated cells?
So, I
Is
mean,
there
one of the things that, yeah, one of the things that I mentioned earlier, right? 1 to 20, right? So, we
okay?
can create much more cultivated meat, 20 times as much as compared to a traditional animal agriculture. So I think just kind of fundamentally there, you've got a massive
Savings.
energy savings there too, right? But I think one other thing that I want to mention, and I think it's kind of, you can almost kind of draw the analogy to electric vehicles, right? An electric vehicle fundamentally is a technology that decouples the car from the energy source, right? And you can think of it like this, right? You charge your electric vehicle on on a solar grid. It's much more energy efficient than if you charge that solar vehicle on like something that's running from like a coal factory, right?
Mhm.
Um, you can think of cultivated meat the same way, right? It's only limited. You're decoupling the cow, which is inherently energy intensive. You were talking about that earlier, and from the meat production, right? So in theory, right, you put a cultivated meat facility on a green grid. It's much greener than if you have that cultivated meat facility on an inefficient grid, on a dirty grid, right? The point is, it's only as bad as the grid that it's connected to,
I
right? The
see.
same as the EV, and having that decouple from the energy is what allows us to actually innovate, right? If you're growing animals for slaughter, no matter where you put them on the planet, it's going to be energy intensive, it's going to be inefficient, it's going to be dirty. But you can put a cultivated meat facility on a green grid, and it's much greener. And I think that's the important takeaway: is you're decoupling the energy source from the production, and you can put that production somewhere where it's green.
Yeah, I love that you say this. For my investors out there who may or may not be mission aligned, the takeaway here is that animals are awful, wasteful, high cost of goods sold business equations. They make awful business tools. They're wasteful, they're inefficient, they don't do the job of feeding people. They only really do the job of feeding animals, and that's what we have been enslaved to. Is we grow all of these crops and we feed them to animals, and yet we're having trouble feeding people. So again, the current system doesn't work. And it's not just you and I that think that, Pavle. The Biden administration put out their biotechnology and biotechnology manufacturing big goals: cultivated meat, precision fermentation, plant-based innovation. All of it was in there with
Yep.
funding earmarked for these things, because governments have to focus on feeding people. Food insecurity will not get you reelected. And food as a national security issue, whoever controls
Yes.
the IP of food, is a very important topic. And governments around the world, Israel, Singapore, Germany, Holland, China, all know
Yep.
this. The United States would be wise
It's
to get with the program.
100%. I mean, you said it, right? It's a matter of national security. And I think that that's how we should be thinking of it. I mean, look at what's happening with the Colorado River, right? And
Right.
it's drying up. We're using a large proportion of that water to grow alfalfa to feed the cows, or exporting that alfalfa to other countries, which means we're literally exporting our most precious resource, our water. It doesn't make any sense, right? For an industry that's inefficient, right? To feed cows, in China and in Saudi Arabia, it doesn't make any sense for us to be doing that.
No, not at all. And the meat industry itself says that 41% of the world's clean water goes to animal factories. Now, that water goes into the ground, and so some of it does come back, but still, 41%, when you see that water is such a commodity for people, is really, you have to wonder, are we really thinking about this correctly and smartly? Because when people don't have food and they don't have water, you then have food and water refugees, just like you have climate refugees and war refugees, et cetera. So then you have people moving and taking over the resources from other, you have obviously war on your hands and other things. A great interview that was on this show, the Plant-Based Business Hour, with Tom Mastrobuoni from Big Idea Ventures. And we talked about how the wars of tomorrow will be around food and water. And that's no small joke. Okay, so as we kind of wrap up here, I have a couple exit questions for you. You knew I'd ask it. Make a couple predictions. Where are we going to be 3 years from now?
I mean, I think 3 years from now, we're going to be well underway. People are going to be eating cultivated meat. It's going to be available for consumption. I mean, I think.
Wait. 3 years? I would have said 6 to 8
years. Oh, it'll be sooner than that for sure.
In hybrid products or an actual end product like a ground beef?
An end product like a ground beef for sure. Yeah, the technology is a lot closer than I think people think. Now, look, the U.S. approving cultivated meat, that's the biggest signal that you can see globally, right? I mean, when the U.S. makes a decision like that, everybody else is going to follow. So I think we're gonna see an acceleration of regulatory approval, and I think cultivated meat, like any other technology, follows the S curve, right? It's gradually then suddenly. So we're thinking of it, as kind of the slow and steady incline that we've seen over the last decade. But this process is going to accelerate. The technology here is going to accelerate, and it's going to accelerate as we scale it as well. So, what we saw over the last decade is going to happen much, much faster over the next 3 years. So, to me, there's no doubt in my mind that in 3 years, we're going to be, cultivated meat is going to be available. Is it going to replace all meat in 3 years? No, that's going to take much longer, but it'll be available for everybody to eat. Certainly in the United States. I'm hopeful that Europe and the regulatory agencies in Europe are going to get on board here really soon and start moving forward there as well. But we're close, and we're going to accelerate from here.
Yeah, it's so very exciting. I will note for anybody watching this, the US was not the first country to approve the sale of cultivated meat. That goes to Singapore. We were about 2 years behind them. So let that sink in. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
Yeah, so I think, and this is just kind
or
of my
5 years
thoughts.
ago. You pick it, 5, 10.
Sure.
Yeah.
For those of us just in the industry, I think, working with biology is a humbling experience, right? I think, my background is in tech and in Silicon Valley and things like that. And I think, a lot of us have kind of brought that mindset into the industry, right? Biology has a way of kind of working on its own timelines. It can be unpredictable. You can't just stay up all night coding and get the job done overnight, right? So I think, one thing that I learned is just to have a deeper appreciation for what it means to work with work in a biological setting, work with biology and things like that. Just an appreciation for the work. Now, that being said, I think, as we start to gain a mastery of working with cells and things like that, things are going to accelerate from here. But that's certainly something that I didn't know coming into it that I have a much deeper appreciation for today.
Yeah, I love that. When you're having a day that doesn't go your way and maybe every biological sample didn't work out as you had hoped, is there a phrase you tell yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been building companies my entire career, so I know that this is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That comes with the territory of innovation, It's just what it means to be an entrepreneur and to be building a company. You can't be in the mindset that every day is going to be this massive leap forward, these massive breakthroughs. Sometimes failure is the important thing that needs to happen because there's lessons to be learned there. And you get to look back on your failures and learn to appreciate them and learn to embrace them, because ultimately that's how you learn and that's how you move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would agree with that. Life is not linear. It's not always just what, it's not always uphill. Sometimes it's, as you say, 2 steps up, but 1 step back. And sometimes it's 3 steps back and then only 1 step up. But then the next
Yep.
time it's 4 steps up and only 1 step back. So you have to be able to handle the vicissitudes of life and business. Same day, still not going your way. You're running around. You had no time for lunch. What is your go-to snack?
Okay, so my go-to snack, I'm actually going to plug another company here because I'm such a huge fan, and my friends there are going to laugh. So Tyndall is like the best plant-based chicken on the planet. They already know that I love their food and that I love their products. So anytime I can get Tyndall into my mouth, I'm going to do so, especially if it's coming from Mr. Charlie's. If anybody's on the West Coast and they've eaten at Mr. Charlie's, they've got a great Tyndall chicken sandwich, and they have a great mission and a great vision as well. So to me, that's my go-to. Anytime I can get Tyndall, I'm going to eat it.
Best thing I've ever had, ever. And that includes all my own cooking. And I'm a great cook and I love to cook. Tyndall did a chicken Parmesan sandwich. And it was like 2 plant-based worlds ago. I salivate for Andre, good friend of mine, good friend of yours, Tyndall chicken. Oh, people, get your hands on it. Well, I want to get my hands on OMeat ground beef. Maybe there'll be a tasting. Maybe I can sneak in there and get a tasting. What do you think about that?
I would love to have you and have you come out and have one of our burgers. Absolutely.
Well, I should tell you, I've been traveling, so we're not in the same place at the moment, but next week or 2 weeks from now, I'll do the Plant-Based Business Hour as a tour through the Blue Nalu plant. And maybe 6 months from now, or whenever you're open to it, I'd love to take everybody through the OMeat plant if you're open to it. And, we don't show everybody everything, of course, but it's always fun to walk through the plant, and maybe I can do a tasting for everybody.
Let's do it.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Pavle Stojkovic, Chief Strategy Officer of OMeat. You can go to omeat.com and check it out. Cultivated meat, it is the future. It is coming. I don't care what you read. Please refer back to this Plant-Based Business Hour to get the real facts, because it's crazy out there. But here we hear it from not the horse's mouth, but the knowledgeable mouth. We hear it from Pavle himself. So thank you, everybody. Pavle, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate having you.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. It's good to see you. And thank you so much for having me.
That's wonderful. Pavle, you don't go away. Everybody else on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. I will see you all next week. Bye, everybody.